All right. Hello and good morning to everyone who's joining us today here on the Zoom call, and also everyone who's tuning in via Facebook. Thank you everyone for being here on this early Tuesday morning. I'm Isabella Mendoza and I'll be one of your moderators for today.
Hello, good morning. I'm Francis de la Cruz and I'll be working with Sela. And welcome to the first episode of Climate Change and COVID-19, Adapting to New Normals, a webinar series held as a side event of the Climate Adaptation Summit, or CAS 2021, formally launched yesterday by the Kingdom of the Netherlands. For today's episode, we will be discussing the current efforts of local governments and communities in responding to both the climate crisis and COVID-19 pandemic. Together with our distinguished speakers, we will be highlighting the lessons learned and sustainable best practices that can be replicated and enhanced for resilience building across local government units or LGUs in the country. Morning, Sela.
All right. Okay, so before we get started, we just have a few reminders for our guests and viewers for today. For those joining via Zoom, we ask everyone to please change your screen name to your name and your organization or your office to help us identify you better throughout this session. You can do so by finding your name in the participant list and pressing the More button and selecting Rename. So kindly do that right now so that we can better identify you. Okay, so another reminder is that our organizers will be keeping everyone on mute for the duration of the sessions to make sure that our speakers have the opportunity to share their story without interruption. So we ask that you kindly avoid unmuting yourself and any ambient noises so that we can leave the airspace open. And last but not least, for any questions and comments, feel free to type them into the chat box. Our team will be monitoring it closely so that we can raise your questions and your comments during the open forum later. And for those joining us on Facebook, whether you are accessing the live stream through the ICSC, our Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities Facebook page, or the Embassy of Netherlands in the Philippines Facebook page, or through the official CAS platforms, please feel free to send your questions and insights through the comment section. We will also be checking those to make sure that we capture your comments and questions. For more information on this climate change and COVID-19 webinar, please visit the following website. So we do have the bit.ly/CAS21 climate COVID-19 and Facebook for both /ICSC.NGO and /NL in the Philippines, and also our Twitter and LinkedIn pages, as you can see on the screen being flashed. And of course, if you want to know more about the Climate Adaptation Summit, please visit the www.cas2021.com website, and also their Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn accounts, which are / or @CAS Summit 2021. And if you have an interest in sharing our webinar on any of these platforms, please kindly use the official event hashtag, which is #AdaptationSummit.
Right. So, Sela, let me give a little background for this initiative. The Embassy of the Netherlands in Manila partnered with the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, or ICSC, to bring to you the Climate Change and COVID-19 webinar, Adapting to New Normals. The three-part webinar series aims to highlight key actors, mechanisms, and experiences around narratives on local climate action planning, the role of science and emerging research for resilience building, and climate finance and policy for upscaling climate action and cooperation as a build-up leading to the Conference of Parties 26, or COP26. To talk more about this partnership, it is my honor to introduce Honorable Peter Terpstra of the Netherlands Embassy to deliver his welcome remarks.
Thank you very much for inviting me to do the opening words for this webinar on local voices and best practices addressing climate change in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Pieter Terpstra, and I'm the Deputy Head of Mission of the Netherlands Embassy. In my previous job, I was part of the EU climate negotiating team, and I'm a former member of the Standing Committee on Finance under the Climate Convention. This is the first webinar in part of a series and coincides with the Climate Adaptation Summit, which is organized by the Global Center on Adaptation, which is based in the Netherlands. And this summit is taking place globally, online, on the 25th and 26th of January. The topic for discussion for today is very close to my heart, and I actually worked with the Institute of Climate and Sustainable Cities from 2012 to 2015 in tracking adaptation finance and trying to find out how much of the global funding actually benefits local communities and local governments. Local communities and local governments are indeed at the forefront of the fight against climate change. And of course, countries need to set ambitious targets in their nationally determined contributions, and governments need to have policies in place to achieve those targets and an institutional setup to implement projects and programs in a good way. But when it comes to adaptation, the focus should really be on making sure that businesses and communities are protected against the impacts of climate change. This means that communities and local government must have the tools and the means to strengthen their resilience, and they must have a say in how national policy is designed and implemented. In the end, it is they who are the main beneficiaries of adaptation action. For my personal experience, it is especially important to take into account the role that women play in their families and their communities. They're often not heard, but play a huge role in strengthening resilience of society in terms of not only finding solutions, but also implementing them. And another important aspect are micro and small enterprises. In the Philippines, as in most countries, most people work for a small or micro enterprise. This means just 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 people working in a small company. And these companies don't have the finance or the resources to assess complex climate models and the impact that has on their supply chain or their future investments. But they do make a difference between barely coping as a community or as a person, or actively growing and developing your community. And the stronger these micro and small enterprises are, the more resilient local communities are. And our current situation with renewed lockdowns all around the world is unprecedented, but the end is in sight. And in the coming year, countries will start to rebuild their economies, which offers opportunities to invest in more resilience and a zero-emission reality. Good healthcare is an important part of a resilient society, but so is resilient infrastructure and good social fabric. Through your work, you have experience in building strong, healthy, and resilient communities. Now it is time to share this experience with other communities in the Philippines and the wider global community through the Climate Adaptation Summit. I'm wishing you a good webinar, and I'm looking forward to learn and share your message for a better, healthier, and more resilient future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter, for sharing your insights with us this morning. We are indeed very happy to be part of this global summit and to have this opportunity to lift the voices of our local communities and even national experiences, because as you said, they truly are at the forefront of the impacts of climate change. And on that note, let's jump right into our program for today. Our episode for this morning is entitled Local Voices and Best Practices Addressing Climate Change in the Time of the COVID-19 Pandemic. We are lucky to have a strong panel of speakers with us this morning that have experienced firsthand the impacts of climate change and now the threat of COVID-19 that are affecting their local communities. With the support of NGOs like CordAid Philippines, ICSC, and the Partners for Resilience, and other stakeholders, our speakers and their LGUs have become leaders in their response to both climate and COVID, as their communities strive for resilience under our new realities. Now, I'm happy to introduce to you our speakers, our 4 speakers for today, and I invite each of them to open their videos and show their beautiful faces as I mention you in the rundown. Okay, so we are joined today by engineer Fernando Lopez of Coron, Palawan. He is the current Disaster Risk Reduction Management Officer of the municipality and also presides as the chair of the Calamianes Resilience Network, or the CRN, a multi-stakeholder convergence network composed of civil society, local governments, and of the 4 municipalities in northern Palawan. We are also joined this morning by architect Marlo Ocleasa and architect Araceli Barlam from the City Environment and Natural Resources Office, and architect Marlo from the CPDO, or City Planning and Development Office of Mandaue City, Cebu. They are both also part of the Mandaue Resilience Network, or also known as the MRN, a multi-stakeholder network that has been working to raise their city's resilience to both climate and COVID over the last few months. And lastly, but definitely not the least, we have with us today Mr. Ractito Melquiades, Secretary of the Sangguniang Bayan in Giwan Eastern Samar, and coordinator for the Giwan Recovery and Sustainable Development Group for Resilience, or the GRSDGR, a multi-stakeholder platform working with the government to build resilience against climate change. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I'd like to invite all our speakers to open their videos and join me and join us in our discussion for today. Ayan, so I can see all our speakers. Thank you very much for joining us. All right, so for this first session, we want to talk about your city and your municipality's experience in addressing climate change. So we can share with our guests your road to resilience so far. The people, the groups that contributed to your process and your successes. And most importantly, of course, we want to know what comes next. Now, what are we looking forward to in the coming years? So on that note, let's kick things off on the west side. Let's visit our friends from Palawan and hear their story. Engineer Lopez, are you there po?
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning, Engineer Lopez. Kamusta po kayo?
Mabuti. Mupiang kaldaw, tunong tanan.
All right. Sige po, sir. Let's start things off. We really want to hear your story today. No? How are you addressing climate change, and what's happening in Coron, Palawan now? Let's give our viewers a little bit of a taste. No? So can you share with us a little bit about Coron, your municipality, and of course, maybe even a little bit about the Calamian region for those who may not know. No? These are 4 municipalities in northern Palawan. So tell us a little bit about those places. And of course, maybe give us a bit of insight also. How does climate change affect your communities over there? We're excited to hear your story.
Thank you, Sheila. Coron, Palawan is a first-class municipality in Palawan, located at the west central part of the Philippines as part of the Calamianes group of islands, between Mindoro and Palawan, along with Busuanga, Colon, and Dinapacan, and about 95 lesser coral islands and islets of the Philippines. It is composed of 23 barangays with over 13,000 households, mostly depending on industries of tourism, hospitality, fisheries, and agriculture. It is home to the rich biodiversity, white sand beaches, karst mountains, lakes, and coastal and marine ecosystems, mangroves, and reefs, making it one of the most loved tourist destinations here in the Philippines. Despite this, Coron is still vulnerable to the impact of climate change, affecting the tourism industry and the water sector. Coron main industry is into tourism. Other municipalities within Calamian is Colon, Busuanga, and Linapacan are also gaining popularity among tourists. The highest volume of tourists come from during dry season when Coron suffers from shortage of water supply, causing these establishments to struggle with securing enough water supply for their guests. Given the current water supply issue, in taking into consideration the climate scenarios, increased temperature, varying intensity and timing of rainfall patterns, and the observable trends of change in terms of frequency and intensity of tropical cyclones. They add to the factor human-induced pressure on the land and water sources. Thus, problems on water shortage will intensify in the future if no intervention will be applied. This is
So-
where the 3R in water technologies prove to be very promising. During the 3R learning exchange initiated by CRN in Coron, where other communities from Calamianes visited Tara, Binavista, Malawi, ancestral domain communities, where 3R technologies were applied and gained positive result in alleviating the water shortage problems. 3R stands for water retention, recharge, and reuse, comprising methods and techniques which positively approach water resources management. To positively approach water resources means that the intervention sustainably increase water availability rather than assuming water resources as finite. The methods and techniques aim to capture water when it is available to store or during the rainy season, or use it when needed. To further strengthen our water, the application of 3R, the management of watersheds, were included in our CCAP PPS programs and plans. In the process, identified reforestation within the watershed areas, plus 3R application, and community management as strategies to provide long-term solution to the water supply in Coron.
Okay. Engineer Lopez, no? So it seems that your water is really one of the biggest issues that Coron is facing right now. Can you tell us a little bit more about the 3R? And as we understand it, the indigenous communities actually play a very big part in the watershed management system. So what does that look like in Coron nowadays? No? So what is the role of the IP communities? And what exactly is the water management strategy that you have going on in Coron?
The indigent Tagbanwa communities represent around 2,826 households, making them very important to be included in development projects like 3R. CORDED implemented the 3R technology in TBM, ancestral domain, where CORDED also trained some 3R IP educators. And the fact that it's been 4 years since it was implementation, we can really see the good result of 3R technology in their watershed areas, most especially in terms of water quantity and quality. The 3R technology also helps with the prevention of flooding and soil erosion in the area. And through CRN, our barangay within Calamian or Calamianes group of islands were able to see the good impacts of 3R. Communities within Calamianes would like also to replicate the 3R technology to their community. CRN also has the initiative to apply the 3R technology and for implementation to all major watersheds and Calamianes through our implemented projects and for implementation, where the TBM 3R IP educators will serve as our resource persons. Also, the application of 3R is considered both a disaster prevention and mitigation approach in our LCCAP and MDRRM plan. So we allotted funding for this so that we can now replicate it to other barangay communities. The efforts of Calamianes Resilience Network, or the CRN, as a multi-stake convergence network composed of 39 organizations, LGUs, the poor LGUs, national government agencies, CSOs, academics, and POs, We were able to engage them and other stakeholders to ensure that the local government plans, projects are holistic and inclusive.
All right. That's a really inspiring story, sir, no? So yung IP communities, the Tagbanwas in Tara, Malawig, and Buena Vista actually started or helped pilot the 3R. And then as you said, now they're turning into the trainers now as it expands throughout the entire Calamian region. So it's looks to us no that it's a partnership between municipalities, which is really, really inspiring. So now that there's a network of groups working together to adapt, no? What's next for Coron? No? What are you looking forward to in the coming years to continue building on your successes and to continue building on your resilience? What's next po?
Among identified as mentioned are forest and wildlife protection, reforestation, and 3R to cover more watersheds in 2021 this year with more funding. Also to strengthen our advocacy on MINRO for municipality with secured funding. CRN continuing role to address climate impacts, focusing on the water issue while addressing the pandemic. Enforcement on payment for ecosystem services, restorative ecosystem adaptation approach, working towards resilience of Coron. The resilience building shouldn't be a word. It must be an action. Thank you.
Wow. I like that last line, sir. No, the resilience building shouldn't be a word. It must be an action. So definitely, this is part of our call to action, to work together to adapt to climate change and the new normal. Thank you very much, sir, for sharing with us your story. Now, we'll come back to you again later to talk about how things have evolved, especially under the current circumstances. So maraming salamat, Engineer Lopez. Now, from our friends in Coron, Palawan, let's move towards Central Visayas now and have a bit of a chat with our architects from Mandaue City. No? So let's move to the industrial, commercial, and manufacturing hub of Cebu in Mandaue City. Hello again, Architect Ocleasa and Architect Barlam. Thank you for joining us here this morning.
Hello, Sela.
Good morning.
Hello. It's nice to see your faces again. So, yun, Coron has been doing this for quite a while now. But as we know, your city has recently just concluded your climate planning process. And in fact, maybe you're still in the process of finalizing the local climate change action plan as well as the climate change adaptation framework. Can you please tell us and tell our guests about what's happening in Mandaue right now regarding your climate planning? Tell us a little bit about Mandaue City for those who may not know, and then talk to us about what have your observations and maybe your learnings have been about how climate is affecting Mandaue City.
Let me discuss on the brief background of Mandaue. So Mandaue is a first-class, highly urbanized city located in the island province of Cebu, Central Visayas Region 7. It is a coastal city, and our neighbors are Lapu-Lapu, the Mactan Island, Municipality of Consolacion, and Cebu City. Mandaue is known for its as industrial and manufacturing hub of Metro Cebu. So we're basically 27 barangays with a population of 380,000 or more as of now. So in terms of density, we're a highly dense city. Outside Metro Manila, we're the first highly dense city. So with regards to the rapid urbanization and development, the city is experiencing multiple problems related to climate change. So this would be the same as Coron. This would be the sea level rise, storm surge, flooding, urban flooding, city level flooding, typhoons, and increase in temperature. So we've been partnering with CordAid and other stakeholders like UP Senway for when we in our formulation of the climate change adaptation framework. So through the course of our engagement and for the formulation of the CCAF, we've learned many things. We've also gathered many updated data regarding the profile of our city. So regarding a brief strategy that we've formulated in our CCAF, we've focused two strategies. This would be resilient community, as well as food and water security. So this is mainly the two strategies that we focus in the adaptation framework. Maybe Architect Ara can add.
Good morning again, Ms. Sela. I'd like to continue with what Architect Marlo was presenting earlier. Before that, I'd like to give a brief background on how we tried to address climate-induced problems in the city. It was in 2014 wherein the city crafted one of the first green building programs which adopted the Verde rating system in full. This is the rating system of the Philippine Green Building Council. After which, exactly a year after, the city won for DOE Philippines the APEX study grant, phase 6. This was very exciting because one of the significant findings of the study showed that the transport sector produced the highest rank in carbon emissions. However, it was the green building program which had showed the highest potential in helping us reduce our carbon emission. After that, there was also a study from UP Cebu, the study project called GUHIT by Dr. Aiza Cortez. It helped us show that the city since 2014 until 2019 was steadfastly the land surface temperature was steadfastly increasing. So that was very scary for us. After that, actually the journey towards an integrative approach to disaster resilience came about when we had the partnership with CordAid Philippines, UP Cebu, Senvi, when we had our community risk assessment late of 2019. So even then, even before the pandemic, we already had this partnership with UP Cebu, Senvi, and CordAid Philippines. And even upon the emergence of the pandemic, we still continued, we surged on with online workshops so that were able to conduct establish problem tree, we identified critical systems of interests for the city. Plus, we were able to continue with the conduct of ICAs, all of which form part of our CCAF, which is also has been mainstreamed sa ating LCCAP. All of this we could not have done without the help and the partnership of CordAid Philippines, UP Cebu, Senvi, and of course ICSC. With the details to that CCAF, maybe I'll give you back to Marlo.
CCAF, I think Architect Ara already mentioned the background, but regarding the climate change adaptation framework, we've learned many things. We've realized that the city cannot do it alone. We need collaboration with neighboring cities as well as other stakeholders in order to mitigate as well as to adapt to the new norm. So there were several learnings, especially with the pandemic. But despite the pandemic, the city still continued because with the formulation of the CCAF, because we believe that there's a link between this pandemic with our climate change framework. So we've identified several systems of interest. So the community, our wetland ecosystem, which is our the river, as well as the mangrove. And then we've also identified issues in our water resources. In this issue, we've understand that Mandaue is using 65% deep well. So, but with that issue, saltwater intrusion has been also a current issue in the water supply. We've also learned that since Mandaue is a manufacturing or a raw resources or raw materials are coming from outside from other LGUs, there's a need to improve logistics as well as ensure that we're able to link with other resources. And also we've also learned that 72% of urban businesses are also affected with climate change.
Okay. So you guys are mentioning a lot of different aspects, no? And then when it comes to climate change affecting urban areas, talagang very complex. The kind of issues and risks that you have to deal with. You talked about a little bit about your vulnerabilities. Say, for example, the communities and their water resources, the interdependence, no, of cities with neighboring cities. Yung whether that's from where you get your resources or just partnerships and making sure that it's a collective approach. But also another truth is that urban areas are also known to be somewhat emitters of what they say, the greenhouse gases. So what we heard is that you guys in your CCAF and your LCCAP, you've actually also been discussing a little bit of what they call the mitigation strategies. Maybe can you share with us a little bit about Mandaue's vision as a green city for maybe the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, that the strategies that you have lined up in that area?
With regard to mitigation, yes, the strategy was two-pronged. We have for the transport sector and for the green building program. But we also saw the importance of conducting greenhouse gas inventory because it was not part of the low carbon model town study. It was a GHG, we realize, is very important because otherwise we don't have a baseline, we don't have basic data. So we're very excited because knowing the output of that study, we now know where to prioritize or where to set our priorities, which is really the green building program of the city, which will start with one of the steps will be to embark on the greenhouse gas inventory, among others, including green building capacity building and so much more. Because we see that despite the urban problems of the city, there is really a solution from the study and using tools introduced to us.
And with our implementation of our green building ordinance, we identified areas that should be mandatory with Verde certification or green building certification. This is in response to the LCMT study also. And then with regards to transportation, we've already just submitted our local public route plan. And in that plan, we've already identified what are the priority intra route as well as intercity route. That is in collaboration with the other two cities, which is Cebu City and Lapu-Lapu.
So it's really a wide network of interventions. No, you're working with other cities, you're working with the private sector, infrastructure and transportation. It looks like Mandaue City really has a lot coming up in the coming years to continue building resilience. No, I want to ask you a little bit about the Mandaue Resilience Network, and maybe we can pull in also my co-moderator Francis, because I know he's also had some work worked with or supported the MRN. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about, what is the role of MRN so far in this process that you've been going through for the planning and also the strategies moving forward, and maybe tell us who's involved, maybe who are the stakeholders that have been part of your process and how they help.
MRN is Mandawi Resilience Network. It was the concept of putting up a network came about through the influence of Cord 8 actually. MRN is composed of internally for different city offices, the CPDO, the Planning Office, the Environment Office, the Office of Strategy Management, and the Disaster Risk Reduction Management Office. External partners are, of course, Cord Aid, UPCNB Cebu, Philippine Red Cross. Did I forget anybody? But I hope I did not. Sorry?
Mandawi Chamber.
Yes, our Mandawi Chamber partner. It is a very cohesive group, very passionate. The MRN started with humanitarian activities or support to the city in the cusp of the pandemic. So they were really a great help because otherwise we couldn't have done much without their help. And then from the humanitarian efforts through urban gardening, it developed into they assisted us in our CCAF, the formulation of our CCAF.
And our urban gardening, we've already also linked with other network like Cafe I, who help us organize the community as well as transfer technology on urban farming. And moving forward with MRN, this will eventually link to our performance governance system, which the city is enrolling. So they will be part of the multi-sectoral governance coalition. So this the MRN is a partner, a critical partner of implementing good governance in our city.
So it's really nice to hear that you really have so many sectors involved in this process, whether that's for climate or whether this is dealing with the pandemic and other factors that are affecting the city. So with everything that you've said, you really have a lot coming up for you in the coming years, whether that's your mitigation strategies or whether it's supporting the vulnerable communities and ecosystems in Mandawi City. Now that the plan is finished and you know the direction that you want to go, you go to the question now is what's next? What can we expect to come from Mandawi in the coming years? What's your first step after the planning process?
Of course, if we say what's next, we just need to start implementing the CCAF and the LCCAF. And then from there, because we now have the plan, we already know which projects to prioritize in implementing. And then, of course, without funding, we cannot have projects. So we have to find funding sources or links to big organizations or big programs. And then, because we've been mentioning about MRN, we need to fully strengthen and continue strengthening our partnership with our stakeholders.
Moving forward with our CCAF, there's a need to cascade actually. Again, we need to cascade the information to the community again. There should be buy-in because in any plan, it would be easy if all stakeholders are aligned to the implementation of the strategic initiative identified. But right now, we are on the process of formulating our performance governance system scorecard. So we are making sure that all the programs identified in our CCAF are part of the scorecard of the city. So that we believe that we need to measure our performance, and we need to measure in order to monitor if we have already implemented the plan, as well as if we have achieved the goals.
Just in case for the audience, if they are not familiar with PGS, Performance Governance System, it is a balanced scorecard introduced to us by the Institute for Solidarity in Asia. It is the Office of Strategy Management under Ms. Jenny Nunez that makes sure or ensures that everybody in the city are monitored based on targets, and the scorecard is fulfilled, and of course all of this ensuring the vision is accomplished within a certain period.
And we need also to strengthen our intercity collaboration. As of now, we've just started with a few programs, but the goal really is to encourage and enjoin or collaborate with our neighboring LGUs, so that we believe that everything would come to this place if everybody is working on the same direction.
All right. So there's a lot of powerful things in the things that you have shared with us, no? The PGS it seems like a very powerful tool to make sure that these plans move beyond just being a plan, that they really are implemented to the letter of the vision that was intended. And of course, as you said, involving stakeholders, not only in the planning, but also in the implementation. So you have a very exciting road ahead in Mandaue City, and we wish you the best of luck with all of that. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us this morning and for sharing all those wonderful insights. All right. We'll come back again to our friends from Mandaue later on in the session. Thank you very much again, both of you. So we've visited 2 places in the Philippines already so far, no, Francis? We visited Coron, all the way on the west side. And then we've also visited Mandaue City. And they both present completely contrasting experiences. Now you have an urban and then you have a rural municipality.
Yeah. I think we're crossing the middle part from the west to the center. Now we're heading towards the east. Yeah. Would you like to introduce our next speaker?
Okay. So as you said, no, we're moving slowly from left to right. We started off in the west side, hit the middle with Mandaue City, and now we go off to the eastern seaboard of the Philippines now with a municipality that is no stranger to the impacts of climate change. Giwan Eastern Samar is well known as the land of the place of first landfall for Typhoon Haiyan, and more than that, they're also experiencing the creeping impacts of what they call the slow onset events of climate change, now affecting their coastal areas, their biodiversities, or the vast marine ecosystems. So with that, let's call on our good friend, Recti. So Recti Melquiades, are you here with us?
Okay.
All right.
Good morning, viewers.
Can you talk to us more about Giwan? Tell our viewers a little bit about your place, for those who may not know, and share with us. I know you've been going through this. You've been having this climate conversation for quite some time now. So, talk to us a little bit about how climate is affecting Giwan, and what are some of the things you've learned about your location. The more you talk about this climate crisis.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Francis. The municipality of Giwan is located in the southernmost tip of Eastern Samar, between Leyte Gulf, on the west side, the Philippine Sea, and the Pacific Ocean on the eastern side. It covers a total land area of around 17,000 hectares with a 160-kilometer coastline encompassing 3 islands, Homonhon, Suluan, and Manicani, and there's also Tubabao and Victory. And the main, of course, the main island area or the mainland area, including Calikuan Island, from where we are broadcasting right now. And you said it right, though. Aguiwan is also has been one of the first one first landfall of Yolanda. It is also the place where uh, Magellan first landed in the Philippines. And incidentally, we will be celebrating the 500 or the quincentennial celebration of the circumnavigation of the world by the fleet of Magellan on the in March, no, of 2021. Our island, or the municipality of Giwan, uh, is known as the home of diverse species and one of the largest marine ecosystem in the Philippines. It has been designated as an NIPAS area. And despite the richness of the biodiversity and ecosystem, the municipality has been experiencing impacts of extreme weather. Yolanda is a very clear evidence of it. And slow onset events. Slow onset events particularly are difficult to measure but are observable. So especially in our islands like Suluan, Umonhon, Manicani, and even the mainland areas, slow onset events has been greatly felt already.
Mhm. Okay, so talagang there's many different factors that you're dealing with over there in Giwan, from the sea level rise or slow onset events, as you were saying, and of course the typhoons that have been hitting Giwan over the last few years. No? So compared, as I said earlier, compared to other LGUs, in fact, Giwan has really been had their eyes on on this climate issue for several years now. I know you have your CCAF already, the Climate Change Adaptation Framework, and the LCCAP that you have already started to implement little by little over the last few years. Can you share with us what are Giwan's, considering everything you're dealing with now, what are Giwan's climate priorities? What are the strategies that you're working on right now? And maybe also a little bit about the CCAF itself. No? What was that process that you had to go through as a community?
Well, yeah, the CCAF is actually a spin-off from the LCCAP. When we did the LCCAP, we found out that its output was a long list of projects and PPAs covering almost everything. No, but we tried to narrow it down or focus on the top priorities of the municipality, and for us, it's actually food security and of course the water management, water resource management in the municipality of Giwan. And the elements that were actually put into it is that into the climate change adaptation framework is that very important is this is a locally driven climate action. We tried to involve communities from the formulation of the LCCAP up to the formulation of the climate change adaptation framework, because we know that the local communities are at the forefront of the impacts of climate change. And then, of course, to build resilience from the impact of climate change, there needs to be coherence in creating development and shaping the way communities and local actors are able to reduce climate change vulnerabilities. And this is actually done by working together and not in isolation of each other. This is very important that communities should know how to coordinate, how to cooperate, and how to work together, knowing the impacts of climate change are affecting them. We put importance in the systems of interest that are into we put into the process of building or formulating the CCAF. No? Of course, we have water, livelihood, infrastructure, health, and agriculture. And then very, very integral in the formulation of the CCAF is, of course, the multi-sectoral cooperation platform, which is the G1 Recovery and Sustainable Development Group for Resilience. I stopped at group because the GRSDGR actually evolved from the G1 Recovery and Sustainable Development Group without the resilience first, because it started as a coordinating body after Yolanda or Haiyan. And then this evolved into the G1 Recovery and Sustainable Development Group for Resilience. So that's what we are now. This is the multi-stakeholder and cooperation platform that we are having in G1. And then of course, very important is also in the process also the impact chain analysis involving, of course, our communities. And also with, in fact, because we already have the priority PPAs or the programs, projects, and activities, we have to put in resource mobilization. Networks, we have to capitalize on the networks that we have, the cooperation platform, which is actually composed of several agencies, government, academe, CSOs, POs, NGOs, and of course the local government unit. So, and from this, we actually are working on how we can finance the PPAs that we have in our LCCAP and in our CCAF. That's why one of the perhaps I can go straight also to the resource mobilization that we are having now. We already have, of course, formulated our proposals for the PSF or the People's Survival Fund, and of course, together with other municipalities like Coron and in Bantayan and Cebu, we have formulated the Green Climate Fund SAP proposal for the 5 communities. So that's actually what CCAF is all about.
It's very interesting, no, sir. So you've actually explained the entire process in sort of a loop, no. So you have the planning, the organizing of your many different stakeholders, all the way towards resource mobilization and building partnerships to actually finance the projects that you're doing, no. And the GRSDGR, the way you explain it and how it evolved, no, from a disaster risk focused group of people transitioning into, okay, let's look more long term. Let's talk about resilience. That's actually a very exciting, evolution of systems and mechanisms in G1 itself. So it seems you have a lot of plans set in place, a lot of people involved in your process now. So in the next few years, what can we expect? What are you looking forward to in your climate action? No? What kind of projects are you prioritizing over the next few years? So we can give people a little bit of a sneak peek. No, this is what you're working on. So what's next for the GRSDGR and for G1 LGU as well?
Well, we are actually hoping and praying that the PSF proposal and the GCF SAP proposal will be approved, because that's where our climate change resiliency action lies. There lies the roadmap to our climate change resiliency program. PSF, we have highlighted actually our food security resilience, and then of course our water resource management because right now we are, as perhaps in the next discussion, we will be uh, talking about slow onset events like sea level rise. And this has actually affected our water resource. That's why we are very keen on putting in other actions or other interventions on our resource management. And of course, food security would be from our farmers, and of course and up to our fishermen and our marine resources. Yeah.
I hope you don't mind if I ask now. I think this is a favorite story and one that I like to highlight whenever you and I have this conversation. Now, you talked about food security and working with your farmers groups and agriculture groups in the area. And we heard this story about the Palawan root crop, and maybe this touches on your sort of traditional knowledge. Maybe you can share with our viewers a little bit about that root crop, that special root crop, and why it came back into the picture after so long, no?
Palawan is actually it's a variety of the taro plant. Of course, there are other places in the Philippines that have that, but we are actually very keen on. That's why this is one of the flagship projects in our PSF proposal, because we want to revive what has been already kind of forgotten resilient crop. Because for the longest time we have already we have been accustomed or we have been eating rice and other crops, no? But we saw the need for reviving Palawan, because this helped a lot and this will help a lot in the resiliency of our communities, especially during disasters. Palawan is a very resilient crop. No? It can actually grow in swamps and other areas that are uh, uh, that are affected by the sea level rise, and it can grow in other areas that that are affected by other impacts as well. Yeah. So we would like to revive this and reintroduce Palawan as a crop that has to be redeveloped, because we want to, as in, like for example, in other crops, we have the cassava chips, and we want to discover other value added chain on the crop. No, that's why in our PSF proposal we have, although it's not just Palawan, we have the root crop research center, which project is focused on Palawan and other root crops that we have in G1.
Okay, I for me personally, I don't know about you, Francis, no, but me personally, I like that story very much, because it shows how much you've really looked into how can we be more resilient, not just in terms of protecting ecosystems, but also food security, and also as you said, no, adding value so that you can enrich livelihood options for local communities and people's organizations. So thank you so much, no, for sharing that story with us, and also telling us a little bit more about your resource mobilization and the CCAF. So we wish you the very best of luck with the PSF proposal and the GCF SAP, and we're hoping with you. No, we have our fingers crossed with you that you will receive good news in the coming months. So we'll come back to you again later on in the discussion, Sir Recti. But for now, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your stories. I know it was very enriching for everyone to hear the road to resilience of Giwan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. So we've had a quick chat with our 4 speakers for the event today and heard such very, very good stories from each of the areas, no, and some themes that stick out to me in all of these stories is that they have all spent a significant amount of time and resources truly trying to understand how climate change affects their communities, whether that was the way Coron learned and studied the water systems and the watersheds in their area, or even what they call the low carbon model town studies that they conducted in Mandaue to learn more about mitigation. And even I think in that effort, the commitment that they have to actually do the baseline studies or the baseline data for their greenhouse gas inventory. And then now we come back to Giwan, where Recti has shared with us the many different research that they conducted to understand slow onset events, to revive the Palawan root crop, not to be mistaken for Palawan, the place, but the Palawan root crop. So it's very valuable, no? They're multi-stakeholder platforms that really became the vehicle for resilience action or climate adaptation. And the reliance or the trust in evidence and science to help guide them through.
Yeah, Sela, if I looking back at what we were doing in ICSC in 2014, right after Yolanda, there was a lot of activities, but it was more of coping with the disaster. So it was post-disaster rebuilding. It was a lot of looking at how to prevent another disaster from happening. But I think we've transitioned over this period of time, in the last 5 years. And I think this is proof, no? What we've seen in Giwan, in Coron, and in Mandaue, where people shifted from taking humanitarian action into looking at how our planning systems and how local government planning can lead towards building resilience and adapting to the impacts of climate change. It's a big, I dare say, it's a big leap, and it's really heartening that it's a discussion that's happening not only among the ranks of advocates or NGOs, but we have people from the local government units who are not only involved but committed to building resilience and having resilience as a centerpiece program in their local plan. So it's really exciting to see how all these things are happening, and I just hope that we'll have more of those similar initiatives in the local government units across the country.
So, but here's a ringer for you, Francis. No, you're talking about how they've moved on from disaster risk reduction and response now to resilience, and here we are in 2021, still in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So here we are facing another challenge, another wrench in their machine. So I look forward to the conversation that we'll have for session 2, where we explore adapting not just to climate change anymore, but now with this new challenge of COVID-19 and how we adapt to those realities.
That'll be a very interesting discussion, because it seems that we were on train towards building resilience and making all this adaptation, and then COVID hit, and 2020 became, it's actually very hard to recall what we were doing last year because it was a lot of the same things: work from home, uh, wearing a mask, disinfecting your hands, keeping social distance. But the problem is climate change didn't stop last year. It didn't stop. That's one thing that COVID did not affect. But the change in climate was happening, and we even had, if you remember, I mean, that's something that I would remember. In the midst of the pandemic, we had typhoons hitting the country.
Yeah.
And I remember that we were thinking, how do we then, again, support communities, help those who were affected in the midst of a pandemic. That was something that was it was a different challenge altogether because instinctively, if there is a disaster, people would rush to help. In this case, we cannot rush to help, and maybe not rushing is actually the biggest help that we can give them because we might be giving them we might be spreading the virus, like we don't know. So it was really, it was a whole year of reflection, I think. And yes, as you said, we'll have time for that when we come back. But right now, what you have something to announce? What are we supposed to do?
So before we head into that very complex discussion on climate change and COVID-19, please give me this opportunity to make a few more announcements. For those who are just joining us here on Zoom or even on Facebook through the Facebook Live, if you want to know more information about this webinar or even the CAS Summit, please visit bit.ly/CAS21 Climate COVID-19 for information, and stay tuned for updates on social media accounts of ICSC and the Netherlands Embassy in the Philippines via Facebook. And to know more about the Climate Adaptation Summit or the CAS 2021, you can visit www.cas2021.com, where also this webinar will be featured. So right now we're still collecting some questions. Rest assured, those who have sent in their questions and concerns, we will be fielding those back to our speakers later on. Keep your ears locked for those answers from our speakers. Right now, we will be sharing a video to show you a little bit what's in store in the webinar series until March. So check out this video prepared by ICSC and the Netherlands Embassy in Manila. And we'll be back shortly. Thank you, everyone.
The Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. It is grappling with the creeping impacts of increasing global temperature, rising sea levels, and reduced rainfall, on top of typhoons and other extreme weather events. Local government units, or LGUs, are at the front lines in the fight against climate change. Community members experience firsthand the gravity of impacts, including stronger storms and floods, saltwater intrusion, and contamination of water sources, and destruction of natural ecosystems. The towns of Giwan in eastern Samar and Paumbong in Bulacan, as well as the city of Mandaue in Cebu, are among the LGUs with dynamic responses to climate change. The participation of fisherfolk, farmers, women, the academe, and other community members contributes to better planning and decision-making.
Dito po sumisilong yung mga isda na dati-dati po dito sa aming kailugan may tugla, may paros. Ang araw po ako ay maliit. Tapos po yung asawa ko po nun dito po nangingisda, talaga po maraming nahuhuling hipon, mga biya, mga ayungin. Ngayon po talaga ay halos nabibilang mo talapia na lang kung arroyo at hipon. Kami po ay halos araw-araw po ay baka. At ang isa ko po nakita doon ay yung pong pakunti na po yung mango. Kasi po wala nang pagkaiman. Halos po, nakita ko po doon sa picture nila na meron pong mga mangrove na talaga pong namamatay. Gusto man po namin magtanim, taon-taon, sumalit. Ang aming pong lugar ay highway na. Kumbaga sa ano po, pag itinanim mo po ngayon, kinabukasan po ay natatangay na ng agos. Kasi wala na po yung dating meron kang lupang pagtatamnan.
Ang kailangan po namin protektahan dito sa aming barangay ang aming eskwelahan sapagkat doon po nag-aaral ang aming mga anak. Ang mga fish pond po na doon kami kumukuha ng aming kinabubuhay, doon po naghahanap buhay ang aming mga asa-asawa. At ang aming mga kabahayan, kailangan po naming protektahan pagdating ng malalaking tubig tulad ng high tide at ang pagdating ng bagyuhan. Sapagkat pag dumating po ang nagsabay ang high tide at bagyuhan, tataas ang tubig. Sanhi ng pagkasira ng aming bahayan, pagkasira ng mga fish pond at doon mawawalan po ng hanap buhay ang mga tao rito.
Doon po nag-umpisa yung Marine Sanctuary na kung saan nakita ng mga expertise natin yung corals na nawawala na dahil sa devastated ng bagyong Yolanda at saka ng maraming illegal fishers. Kailangan ko bantayan yung karagatan, yung ating ecosystem para makasustain sa family ko at saka hindi lang sa family ko kundi sa community na kung saan lahat po ng community lalo na dito sa Giwan ay dependent po sa rekurso ng dagat.
The COVID-19 pandemic continues to plague the Philippines. With the countrywide quarantine restrictions, local governments have been responsible in addressing the health and other needs of their constituents. Yet, despite their leadership and commitment, they cannot do this alone. Cooperation across sectors and different levels of government is critical to implementing sustainable and concrete changes in order for communities to be able to survive and thrive in the two new normals brought about by climate change and COVID-19.
If climate did lots of changes, we need also to adapt in terms of approaches. That is why the marriage between science and development is very critical. We need to put lots of academic, scientific approach, the people-driven approach. These approaches will help us in terms of building resilient development, not just for this generation, but the coming generation. We need good leaders, not just at the provincial level, not just at the international, national, regional level, but we need also good leaders at the community level.
Although there are a lot of steps forward, a lot more that needs to be done, but the process in itself is taking good strides and very important strides in terms of turning local planning into a collaborative effort and then taking lessons from local communities and turning them into national policies and national changes that can actually help improve the situation and make sure that our frontliners to climate change actually get the help and the resources that they need.
This is where the Partners for Resilience do. Making sure that their voices are heard, making sure that they're empowered, making sure that they could act together, and making sure that the LGU could listen to them, and even eventually creating a model, creating a stair that the planning, the investment should not be coming from top, it should be coming from the bottom.
The climate crisis must be addressed with the same urgency as the pandemic. Both require heeding the science in order for actions and policies to be evidence-based and risk-informed. In the face of multiple risks, communities and their governments need to work smart and act swiftly towards a resilient recovery and long-term sustainable development. As part of the Climate Adaptation Summit 2021, and to continue the conversation, the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities and the Netherlands Embassy in Manila are hosting a three-part webinar series entitled Climate Change and COVID-19, Adapting to Two New Normals. The series aims to advance critical discourse on climate action amid the pandemic, including local narratives addressing climate and COVID-19, climate science and emerging areas of research, and global cooperation on climate finance and policy for adaptation as build-up to COP26. Join us in diving deep into these issues on the 26th of every month from January to March 2021.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much, ICSC, for that video. So before we jump into our next session, as we would if this were a face-to-face session, I would like to invite all our Zoom participants to please open your videos for a quick photo op. All right, I see some of the videos starting to come on. Please, everyone who's joining us via Zoom, please turn on your videos just for a few seconds and we'll take that video, that screenshot, so we can document your lovely faces. All right, I'm just gonna give it a minute or so we can wait for everyone to situate themselves and turn on the cameras. One more call, please turn on your videos for a brief photo op so that we can continue with our discussion. All right, we're taking the screenshot now. Everyone smile. And one more for the next group of photos. Pause for technical difficulties. Just 1 second, everyone. All right, one last frame down. Okay, all right. Sorry, technical difficulties, but we got the photo in, and thank you everyone for showing your faces even for a few seconds. We're very happy that you're all here with us this morning. And with that, I pass you on to my co-moderator, Francis, to lead us into the next exciting discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so as you've seen in the video, we're not just talking about climate adaptation or resilience to climate change. As we all know, we're still in the midst of this COVID pandemic, and there was this question, and I think I'll use this as a guide. Now, what is the link? How do we then link our work in building resilience in our communities to climate change? and to another crisis that came our way, which is COVID-19. And that's what we would like to discuss with our resource persons. As I mentioned earlier, I think many LGUs, especially our guest today, we need to congratulate them for making climate adaptation as a central theme in their local development planning. But the question is, so how did the pandemic impact the work in resilience building? As you have said, they were on train. We were getting there. We were, making proposals, trying to get funds, implementing projects. But then COVID happened, and that's something that we would like our guests to reflect on. How did the pandemic affect or impact your work on resilience building? How did the vulnerabilities to climate impacted by the pandemic? We're talking about vulnerable communities. What were the impacts of that? Like some of our communities were vulnerable to climate change impacts because of their economic situation. And you would like to know, like from where you're sitting, how did the pandemic impact these same communities? And if there are lessons, what would be some of the lessons and opportunities that we should take to heart as we move forward with, now facing two life-defining crisis, the climate crisis and the pandemic? Well, the question is addressed to all our resource persons, Engineer Lopez, Architect Barlam, Architect of Liasa, and Mr. Recti. Can I invite our resource speakers to switch on their cameras? Sir, unahin ko na kayo. Engineer Lopez, how did the pandemic affect your resilience work?
Okay, thank you. During this pandemic, the Syrian, with the supports of the LGUs of the Calamian, prioritized the implementation of the plan to conduct various studies to identify, understand the vulnerability of watersheds. The studies are intended to look at the biophysical characterization, socioeconomics, DRRCC, and 3R assessment. Impacts in terms of not only the reallocation of funds, but also of the facilities that highlighted the connection between DRRCC initiatives. From the use of the newly built evacuation center as one need or use as an isolation unit, to the collaboration with the municipalities and barangays and installation of hand washing stations in barangays, hospitals, health centers, operation centers, quarantine facility, quarantine holding areas, boundary checkpoints, and also public areas such as public markets, terminals, and ports of 4 municipalities, namely Busuanga, Coron, Culion, and Linapacan, to prevent local transmission of COVID-19. With some adjustment in the original amount of fund, we still managed to allot a considerable amount for the GCF proposal. Sana matuloy.
Yes, sir. Just to clarify, you allocated some funds, reallocated some funds. That the funds that were allocated for preparing the GCF proposal, some of them were allocated to address some of the immediate needs in response to the crisis. But you still managed to save some money so that the proposal can still be developed. Tama po?
Yes po.
Tama. Okay. Tapos you also mentioned you have an evacuation center that was
Yes,
later used as an isolation center. Can you tell us a little bit more about the evacuation center?
yes. Our newly built evacuation center is funded by the national OCD. It is called the Regional Evacuation Center. But after this, yes, last year, 2021, yes, 2020, after na matapos ito, tama-tama is dumating itong COVID. So, na wala kaming mapagkukunan.
So you were able to use the
Yes.
So you were
We
able
use
to use the evacuation center as the isolation facility.
Yes, up to now, we use this as isolation facility. All of the quarantine positive cases are there. We placed there up to 21 days.
You also mentioned, you also mentioned water. Water is a major concern in terms of your climate adaptation work because you run out of water. I mean, there's a lot of a high level of water stress, no, especially during the tourist season, and water is also important in addressing the pandemic because one of the easiest ways to prevent transmission is the washing of hands. How did that affect your work on water? How did the pandemic affect your work on water? On the one hand, you have a shortage, but on the other hand, at the same time, you have a need for steady water supply to prevent infection.
Yes, during dry season, I said we have a shortage of water during the dry season. So, but when the COVID came, nawala po ang aming mga turista. So, wala pong turista kaming dumating. So, may shortage man ng tubig, but dahil sa ang gumagamit nito ay local lang or kami lang po dito sa Coron, we manage na nakapag naging angkop naman or nagkaroon naman kami ng tubig for the past year. But some areas like small island barangays, they all suffered again a shortage of water.
Yeah, thank you, Engineer Lopez. I'd like to ask our colleagues from Cebu. Kayo naman, how did the pandemic impact your work on resilience building in Cebu on climate? What was the impact? How did it affect your work?
Of course, hi Sir Francis.
Hello.
Of course, our resilience was tested, and it's being tested until now. The pandemic showed us that it is not enough to survive, but we need to accept and to move forward despite all the odds of this new reality. The pandemic also showed us that we need to build on our resilience based on the FOE or future operating environment that was conducted by the OSM. It showed us to really focus on community resilience. Kasi we believe that no amount of planning for development is ever enough if we can't even plan to be resilient in the first place. That's it po.
I think with the formulation of our climate change adaptation framework and with the pandemic, there's one common denominator that we've learned. That would be the strengthening the community engagement. I think problems like with the COVID, with pandemic, or with the climate change, if there is no engagement, if there is no buy-in within the community, it would be harder to implement this program. So engagement and empowering the community would be the key in not necessarily to resolve it right away, but it would make the implementation of the project easier.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to elevate that, no? The empowerment of communities, the involvement of communities and stakeholders in building resilience. So it's not just LGUs, it's not just NGOs. It's actually the getting the stakeholders involved, yung communities natin. So I just want to elevate that. Sa Recti kayo, how did COVID impact your resilience work or your climate adaptation work?
Yeah, hello again, everybody. Actually, when COVID-19 first came to the Philippines, and the lockdown started in March, and then it was at that time also that we started our defense against COVID-19, knowing that we were preparing for the influx of people from Manila, Cebu, that had already been having some surges. Perhaps if we can associate this with the Balik Probinsya program, and that's why we were preparing for this influx of individuals and groups coming in from the metropolis of Cebu, Manila, and other areas, coming back to Giwan, no? And our lockdowns were in place already. Our border controls were in place already, and coinciding with this also was the threat of ASF. Do you remember? It was also at this point in time that we were bracing for the impact of the ASF in the Visayas, knowing that there were already some outbreak in Luzon and in Mindanao, and this coincided with how we were doing our border control in the boundaries of the next municipality of Mercedes. And so we were on the part of GRS-DGR, we were very fortunate that PFR, or the Partners for Resilience, and Board Aid had some funds to spare, so that we were able to get some funds for some programs like hand washing facilities for some of our key areas that we were able to deploy. And then of course we were able to donate PPEs and some gears for our frontliners. We were able to formulate some hand sanitizers for our frontliners that we distributed to the RHU and the barangays and other areas as well. So at this point, while the LGU was preparing for the influx of individuals and the transmission, we were able to help the LGU, the GRS-DGR, or Giwan Recovery and Sustainable Development Group for Resilience, was able to help the LGU in its response, COVID response to the pandemic very early. So right now, it is a very unfortunate event that we are experiencing surges in transmission and infections in our place. And we are trying to readjust our strategies on how we could stem the further transmission of the disease in the municipality. And at the forefront is the RHU and the IATF, local IATF in G1. And fortunately, JRSDJ is also part of the IATF. Some of its partners are part of the IATF, so that our committee or our climate actions in response to COVID-19 with our partners who also were able to shore up some assistance to our RHU. We give thanks to our partners such as CCAT and other NGOs, the PMPI, Good Neighbors, and other partners. They also have been able to help and provide assistance to the LGU in its COVID response until now.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. But before we move on, we've been reminded that we're using a lot of acronyms. ASF is African swine flu. Yeah, African swine flu. That happened even before the pandemic, and it affected primarily Luzon, but later on, some of that actually went to prevent that from jumping onto the next islands. There were some measures already in place, which, as Sir Recti mentioned, sort of prepared them to look when they were trying to address or stem the transmission of COVID. And RHU is the rural health units, no? Yeah, rural health units, those who are doing frontline work in the communities, yung sinasabi po, what we call the infection prevention and control in the community. So they're the ones who are, making sure that people wash their hands, and if they have symptoms, that they are referred to the COVID hospital. So let me then ask you. It seems that some of your activities pre-COVID served you well when the pandemic struck. But what was, if there was one thing that caught you by surprise? What was something that you had to do, something very different from what you were used to? For example, Engineer Lopez and Architect Ocliasa, you're from the DRR, no? So I think you've had a lot of experience in addressing typhoons and floods, etc. Even ASF, no? But what's different with the pandemic? What was something that you really had to study and prepare for?
Is that the lesson?
Ano po? What was something that you had to study or you had to learn very quickly about the pandemic?
Yeah, because COVID-19, what we had learned is being a challenge. That was a challenge by thinking outside the box. Yeah, rolling out of the studies without compromising health protocols, continuous learning with solutions from last year to the present. So we must need to strategize. Also, the resilience of climate plans, depending on the people who have clear understanding of the importance and the consequences of failing to implement them despite the ongoing pandemic.
Yeah, so we had to study how to, not just how to do resilience work, but also how to do resilience work while not being the cause of infection or not being infected by a pandemic. How about you, Mr. Recti or Architect Ocliasa? Would you like to weigh in on the discussion?
Yeah, it's good. It's good that you mentioned infections because I, for one, was infected of COVID very late in December. No, the middle part of December, and I was able to return to work on the, I think it was on the second week of January. So COVID-19 is very close to my heart, actually. Um, this is a very clear a manifestation that we really have to follow the protocols set by our health authorities. In fact, there are very strict protocols that each and every one of us has to follow. And even if you were doing everything to avoid or prevent infection, there's still chances that you will get the virus in your system. However, it is a known fact also that each LGU has to address, you know, its own transmissions or cases of transmissions in its locality. G1 has its share of transmissions. In fact, in the province of Eastern Samar, we are the highest in transmission. Perhaps it's also caused by the fact that we are the economic hub in the southern part of Eastern Samar, and that's why we are actually tied. Our hands are tied in our border lockdowns. We cannot prevent some of our friends from the other municipalities from coming in because they come to G1 for essential purposes like medical purposes, shopping for food and others. No, so that's why it is a very and of course we are also trying to balance our response for preventing further transmission and the economic and livelihood of our citizens. No, we cannot, of course, we cannot discount the fact that even with this pandemic, we still have to address the economic situations in our locality. Given that there are already some businesses that have to fold up because of the pandemic. That's why the balancing act is there, on how we can provide livelihood or sustain livelihood for our people and prevent further transmission of the virus in our area. So that it has to be a balancing act, and there has to be some involvement of the barangays. That's why we have this Oplansita from the very beginning, and that's why we are now experiencing some fatigue in our barangays. No, installing the Oplansita in their barangays, and then while the virus was not yet in. And then right now, it's already, the virus came in late to our place. But still, we have to revive the Plancita of late because we want to stem further transmission of the virus in some of our areas. We have implemented granular lockdowns in some other areas and declaring critical zones in some localities as well. So, and of course, we want to have stricter border lockdowns, even if we have to to realign funds to have our isolation units, increase our isolation units for our COVID cases.
Thank you. Well, I think Cebu would have something to share then, because I think you're just like if Giwan is the economic hub of the southern part of Samar. I mean, Mandaue, as mentioned, is also a hub. It's a commercial and industrial hub. How did the pandemic impact your work in? You were trying to become a green city, right? Before the pandemic. What was the impact of the pandemic to that vision?
Well, one of the impact would be the need to be creative, not just to communicate, but also to link. There's a need to link. So it's not enough just to communicate, but link to collaborate. It's very important. As a planning officer, that's one of the adjustment that I made during the pandemic. Linkages with other LGUs as well as organization like or building a community like MRN would be an essential response to the pandemic. So that's what we've adjusted more or less in during that pandemic. Aside from the protocols, all the necessary response within the procedure of our government, but the one of the major adjustment was really to the linkages of other stakeholders.
Yeah, linkages. One of our participants commented here. In the work that we do, in resilience building, in making our plans are attuned to climate change impacts, meetings and consultations are very important, right? And when we were locked down, when we had to work from home, some would say, okay, let's just meet online. But it's not as easy as it sounds, because not everyone would have machines or like laptops or computers or phones that can manage, that can handle calls. And sometimes even if you have the equipment, you may not have the internet connection or the Wi-Fi connection. So when we say we should physically distance, not socially distance, even the vehicle to reduce the social distance through internet sometimes is even limited. I even had an experience where we were doing consultations where we had the computer, we had Wi-Fi, and then there was a brownout. There was a power outage. So we had to reset again. So it was just all these things that we would sort of sometimes take for granted. Those, especially for those who have access to backup power systems or like strong Wi-Fi and access to equipments. But even meetings and consultations became harder. I was also, when I was listening to what you were mentioning, Sir Recti and Architect Marlo, when we were doing the Oplan Sita and there were all these lockdowns, I mean, I understand we were trying to stem, we were trying to control the traffic, the movement of people who might be carrying the virus. But the lockdown also affected actors who could have helped in communicating messages in our communities. The humanitarian actors, for example. I've talked to people who were involved in humanitarian action in the health sector particularly, who were also locked down. So like they were so, as much as, well, they know that they can do something about it, at least explain what COVID is. And, make the lockdowns less of a psychological, it was a big psychological burden, like being locked down. But actually you can be in a lockdown, you can be, you can restrict your movements, but at the same time still, find food, look after family, like in a safe way. And it was something that, I mean, for personally, that's something that I had to learn because like I sort of know, like I have an idea how to respond to a climate disaster, like if there was a typhoon or a flooding or all that. But responding to a pandemic, it was something that I also had to learn very quickly. Like, how do you, because I didn't have any previous experience in responding to a crisis brought about by a pandemic. And yeah, I mean, that's something that well, hopefully, well, I'm hoping that we'll be able to do more because I don't think we can afford, uh, you know, lockdowns that are, as you have said, Selecti, there's fatigue is setting in. Like we have the longest lockdown, I think, in the world. And it's very hard to it's becoming harder and harder to enforce it. But at the same time, we know that we cannot just let go. So maybe there's the balancing act that you were mentioning. Like, how do we make sure that we don't get infected, but we do the important work that we were doing before? Resilience, as architect Ara mentioned, I mean, it's something that has to be, well, it's continuing work, and you have to involve the community. But what if the community is locked down? What if those who are supposed to coordinate are not able to coordinate? Like we don't want like we can prevent I think other disasters from happening if we can bring in all these things together, especially if that we have learned how to do resilience work for climate. And I think after 1 year, we've also already learned some lessons on how to address a pandemic. Let me just share. I was involved in a small study in the municipalities of Paumbong and Malolos. We looked at the impact of COVID restrictions on the economy. And yeah, I mean, there's what was clear was that everyone had to adjust. Those who were able to adjust actually thrived. Those who were not able to adjust, and others just cannot adjust very quickly. I mean, those suffered, and it would be. I think it's something that hopefully our LGUs would also look at. It's not just how do you enforce a Oplan Sita or lockdown or checkpoint system. It's also looking at what's happening below. What if people are going hungry, people are feeling caged, the psychological baggage, the mental health of people. These are things that in our work in resilience is it's already there. It's just that we are dealing with a different crisis. I mean, a slightly different crisis, that of an infection. So, see, Engineer Lopez mentioned an opportunity. He mentioned this story of they built an evacuation center, not for COVID, an evacuation center as part of preparations for typhoons that they were able to use. What are other opportunities do you think can be used or can be maximized when we were doing resilience work? And now that we have to face a pandemic, while Peter in his remarks said, the end is in sight, but we're not yet there. I mean, we have the vaccine, we have measures now, but we're not yet there. But what do you see are some of the opportunities that we already have because of our climate adaptation work or climate resilience work that we can maximize so that we can address the pandemic as well? What are some of these opportunities?
Some of our opportunities is through the study on CCAF and also in the projects that we have last year, and also with the CRN, we able to raise the issue on the need because of the environment that very low or mababa na yung mahirap ang tubig or very low supply of water. So we must to address who is the one to in charge of this problem. So we raise CRN is always raising the issue on the need for MINRO as a part of a long standing advocation in its municipality here in Calamian. So last year we got the municipal resolution to every municipality. Now is we are also again we are securing enough funding for the next. This is our next step to have a funding for the MINRO office. That's one of the opportunity. The opportunity now in Corona, we nagbukas na po kami ng tourist. Ang aming tourism ay binuksan na namin last December. This is one of the opportunity of the economy of Coron na magkaroon na uli ng turista. Unti-unti ay nagkakaroon na po kami ng turista, local tourist. Mayroon ding mga foreign pero nandito sa ating Pilipinas. So yun lang, we have strict on the protocols. Nagkaroon kami, ang aming mga turista ay kailangan nandoon lang sa sa mga airlines sa eroplano at ito ay kailangan RT-PCR negative sila within 72 hours. So strict protocols, then proper mask and face shields even in the community. Yun po yung dapat na kasi nandiyan na at saka yung social distancing. Hindi natin maiwasan na baka may makapasok pa rin na virus dito sa amin. Last October, August to October ay napasok kami ng nagkaroon kami ng local transmission pero natapos namin ito within 2 months na trace kaagad at na zero namin yung aming local transmission. Up to now, wala kaming mga local transmission. May pailan-ilan na didetect or namin doon sa mga dumarating na mga apur at saka returning citizen na naka-quarantine kaagad yun at mayroon naman tayong protocol for assessment na pagdating nila. So yung mga yun, opportunity sa economy ng Coron na makabalik na ulit.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir. So while slowly opening the economy, there are still strict. There are protocols to prevent infection and to control infection in the communities. No? You also mentioned yung enhancing the local environment. Especially for the services it provides, in your case, water, and highlighting that it's an important issue not only for as a climate issue, but also for in preventing infection or the spread of the infection in the community. How about you in Cebu and in Giwan? What do you think are the opportunities that are that have presented themselves while in the last year?
In Cebu, since due to the lack of public transportation, so the implementation of our bike lane network was easier. So since people were using bike as an alternative mode of transport, so it was easier to implement the plan because people are adapting to that mode of transportation. So that's one of the opportunity that we saw, as well as the people were able to value their little a portion of their land to urban gardening. So they were able to appreciate that they need to plant and harvest their own food, but they were able also to understand that to sustain, there's a need to network also.
Thank you. So the bike lanes and local food production, that's in line with your green city, the vision of a green city, you know? And due to the pandemic, that sort of well facilitated that well it was yeah, hindi naman, we do not wish pandemics to happen so that we can have programs, but it just so happened that you know, they appreciated it siguro quicker, the production of local food production and the use of bikes and supporting non-motorized transport in the city. Kayo, Sir Recti.
While we were doing the CRA or the climate risk assessment, we incorporated in our modules following up strict protocols, raising awareness on the COVID-19, because we were doing the CRA or the climate risk assessment early in the pandemic, around June, July. So we were doing this face-to-face consultations with some of our barangay officials, and we were able to impart some of the protocols and then some of the strategies that barangay should perhaps follow in preventing the infections in their areas. And we're trying also to of this late, we're trying to request some of our partners who are already on the ground doing some humanitarian work to incorporate in their work, you know, the sustaining, you know, the increasing the awareness and strategies in some of their beneficiaries and the groups covered by their programs. So we're trying to coordinate with them on how they can perhaps help in lessening the increase of this virus in areas that they are covering in Giwan.
Yeah, thank you to our speakers. Sir Recti, I didn't know that you were. I'm glad to see you back in health. I didn't know that you were you know, one of those people that we just, you know, mention as a number of like infected individuals. I'm really glad that you're back at work, and I hope the worst effects are not experienced. I think you can. I believe that you can again be resilient once more.
Well, by God's grace.
Not only to. Yeah, inshallah. Inshallah. Yeah. Okay. Well. Yeah. So I think, you know, in the last half hour or so, we were discussing the work doesn't stop. Work on climate resilience is not stopping. Not even COVID can stop us. We have to adjust. And I think we have adjusted. And some of these adjustments resulted into opportunities for us to further advance our climate work. We'd like to spend the rest of our time in an open forum with our participants. And we've been collecting some of the questions that maybe Isabella can help read out and field to our speakers. Sala?
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much, Francis. And it was really nice to listen in on that discussion on how all the LGUs are addressing and meeting head on the challenge of COVID-19. So as Francis said, we've collected quite a few questions that I'll be reading to you guys. But just so everyone knows, our team here, our tech team here, will also be showing a few pictures as we discuss the answers to these questions. So they'll be sharing some photos of the LGU's experiences with COVID-19. So with that being said, let's go to our first question. And this one is directed to Engineer Lopez of Coron. So the question here is that given that the LCCAP of Coron was approved in 2020 during or in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, what were the major breakthroughs that helped the municipality make this a possibility, considering considering the pandemic had already begun? And connected to that, there is a question from Paula Bergonzado on how do you see these further improving your approaches to ensuring water security during the pandemic? Engineer Lopez, can you tell us your thoughts?
Pakiulit.
One more. Sige, sir. So the question is, since the LCCAP was approved during the pandemic, our guests want to know what were the breakthroughs or what helped you along in ensuring that the LCCAP... sorry.
Hindi maganda ang
all right.
sounds. Marating.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, one more time. The question, sir, Engineer Lopez, is that given that the LCCAP of Coron was approved during the pandemic in 2020, our viewers want to know what was the breakthrough or what aspects of your work helped in making sure that it was approved despite the pandemic. And there's another question asking, how do you see those breakthroughs improving your approaches to water management despite or during the pandemic?
Our LCCAP last year was approved, and one of the major activities there, especially and we get that in a CCAF is our water. So I think we focus on water issue. We must focus to have good sustainable watersheds of most of our watersheds here in Coron. Some of the watersheds here are very vulnerable, especially on the island barangays, sa maliliit na isla na sa tingin ko is doon kami po-focus na kailangan is with the aid ng CRN, na Calamianis Resilience Network, kailangan naming mag-focus na magawa na namin, especially the 3R application or na makapag-simula na kami para maging maayos itong mga watershed ng At and the other one is kailangan naming ang mga community ay dapat na maging multi-stakeholder sila na magkaroon ng kasanayan or ma-improve nila yung kanilang knowledge patungkol sa ating pagsustain ng ating environment, lalong-lalo na sa watershed.
Okay.
So doon po kami ipo-focus mostly.
So it seems, no, Sir Engineer Lopez, no, that it was really born from the need, no? It was very much necessary, despite the pandemic, to make sure that you were able to move forward with your resilience actions, for your climate actions, because because of the shortage of water was really becoming a bigger issue. So it's nice to hear, no, that so the answer to the question is it was the need of it, and of course the support of the CRN. And I hope that answers the question from our viewers. Thank you very much for that question. And thank you, Engineer Lopez. For our next question, this one is posed for Mandaue City. So this is for Sir Marlo and Ma'am Ara. The question here is, being able to promote cycling as a solution to the lack of public transportation during the pandemic, as well as part of your strategies under low carbon transport. Where do you see LGUs like Mandaue playing an important role in promoting active mobility in the Philippines?
Maybe with our link with other LGUs, we are able to influence them to do also the same, to do the same program, or to implement the bike lane network. As of now, we've been talking with the two highly urbanized city, Lapu-Lapu and Cebu City. So I think that's one of our contribution, the city's contribution, that we're able to discuss the bike lane network. And it's not just a network within the city, but within the three highly urbanized cities. So
not just having bike lanes within Mandaue, no, but this is part of your tri-city model of really making sure that it's conducive or safe for all cyclists or pedestrians going across city boundaries. So that's very interesting. So thank you so much for that answer. And last, for the individual questions, we have one more for D1. And I think, Sir Recti, you've touched on this a little bit a while ago when you were talking about the need to cascade or to continue capacity building despite the pandemic. So our question for you today is, in the context of addressing both climate and pandemic impact, where do you see the value of continuing or continuous capacity building? And how will the implementation of those kinds of engagements at the barangay level change under the current circumstances? So how are we going to do these community engagements, community capacity building under the context of climate is still very much important, but COVID is still a factor that we need to take into consideration? So, Sir Recti, let us know what you think.
In fact, this is one of the challenges that we are now facing, especially on the humanitarian work that our partners are doing. But we are well aware that of the protocols set by our health authorities, and we want to impart how we can perhaps make. Because we cannot actually the online strategies is out of the question because of the quality of the connection here in our place. No, in fact, we have to travel several kilometers coming here to this place just to be able to connect to. A stable connection for this webinar, and our partners are actually coping with how they can sustain their work on climate actions without them being infected also, and while they are doing work and continuing the work on climate actions, they are also doing some capacity building for our communities in their work with their groups. We are particularly very meticulous in reminding them to, of course, be very careful in dealing with with their groups or beneficiaries, and in reminding the communities where they work on the realities of COVID-19, because until now, there are still people and individuals who are not actually convinced that COVID-19 is real, is a reality. No? There are some pessimists, or I mean, there there are some people who do not believe that that COVID-19 is here until the time that they get infected themselves, and that's when they actually realize that COVID-19 is in our midst. So we are very thankful that our partners are doing their humanitarian work, even if it's, it's not as uh, fast as they could, they would want to, because of the pandemic, and their programs have been stalled, so to speak. Some of our partners like ICSC has to postpone the programs. ZSL is in standby in Cebu before she comes in, because we have this lockdown, and she's been messaging me on how was the new protocol in coming back. So these are JDFI is still in other places as well, and they want to come back around February or March. And it's a good thing that they too are very aware, and they too are capable of capacitating or building awareness and capacitating their communities about COVID-19.
Really, it requires a lot of creativity, no, sir, to find ways around the new protocols, the new guidelines and restrictions. Because what I'm getting from what you're saying, it really is still as crucial as ever to make sure that our communities are getting the right information at the right time. No? So a lot of creativity talaga is required to get people inside in the municipality and coordinating with others. So thank you so much for that, and we wish you again best luck in making sure that people are able to get back in touch with the communities of D1.
Stella?
Yeah.
It's just a time check. It's 11:27, so we have a few more minutes left, and I would like, with your permission, I'd like to address some of the questions in our chat box, and another question from from those who joined us on FB. And we'll try to do this, like just quick reactions. The first one, Sir Recti, there's a question on the chat box. How do we reconcile our work on climate resilience and mining in G1? So yun, nandito yan sa chat box, so I think we need to address that very quickly. How do you want to address? How do we?
Yeah, mining was already in G1 before we actually did some work on climate change. Before COVID-19 came, and that's why we're trying to strike a balance on what the national wealth is giving, that the companies are extracting, particularly in Humonon. We are trying to isolate those barangays, or form a barrier between the barangays that already have these mining companies present, and the barangays that have not yet been exposed to mining operations. In fact, with the help of some of our partners, like the Miserior, Philippine Miserior, we are trying to declare some areas as watersheds that so that our friends from the mining sector would not be able to touch some of the areas that have not yet been exploited by our friends in the mining sector. So while we cannot stop them with their mining operations, we have to close some gaps in our resilience work with other barangays that have not yet been exposed to mining operations of the mining companies in Humonhon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sir Recti, for addressing that. We have another comment, and any one of you can answer this. This is from someone who joined us on Facebook. Well, it's laudable that all these things are happening at the local government unit. And do you think what do you think would be the impact of declaring a climate emergency at the national level? Any thoughts? Mukhang wala ah. Kailangan pa ba na mag-declare? Do we still need a declaration?
Yeah, the climate emergency has already been here for quite some time, and the climate emergency declaration is already long overdue. So I hope the national government would actually do what it should have done a long time ago.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So the emergency has been declared already by I don't know, maybe the big typhoons and the various impacts that you're experiencing in the last few years. Well, I would like to acknowledge, I know that your work in Giwan, Cebu, and in the Calamianes, like your programs are not just based on, what you feel is right. As Ma'am Aras mentioned, they have cooperation, they cooperate with the University of the UP Senbai. And I just want to acknowledge that in this Zoom room we have friends from higher educational institutions or universities who are providing us with research support and on various things, ecosystem studies, very specific ecosystem studies, or even packaging materials on how to inform people about or get people involved in climate adaptation. So I just want to acknowledge that. I also would like to acknowledge our friends from the Committee on Climate Change of the House of Representatives. Thank you very much for joining us. I think it's very important that our friends in Congress, especially the Climate Change Committee, are part of our discussions on this important topic of how do we face or how do we move forward with our work on climate resilience in the midst of a pandemic, because I think this is not, it is something that one sector or one task force can address on its own. It has to be a multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral approach. So thank you very much for being here with us, our friends from Congress. Do we have any other questions, Sela, on the chat box or from the Facebook?
No, I think
Let me
we
just
have it all
review.
covered, Francis.
Right. Right. Okay. Um, yeah. Well, it's been you know for we have a few more minutes, and let me just yeah, chime in the discussions. Something that I'm thinking of, is how do we move forward? Like we all, we see all these opportunities. We have some, limitations that COVID has given us. But what do you think can be some ways forward so that we are able to do climate adaptation or building climate resilience, even if we have the pandemic? I think Sir Recti, described clearly the situation. Like we have groups who are not able to do the work just because there are limitations to travel. What can be ways forward, do you think, my dear friend? Ma'am Ara, Sir Marlo, ano kaya ang way forward natin? How can we move forward with climate resilience work kahit na may pandemic?
Hi, Sir Francis. I believe a very practical thing to do, not just for LGUs but all organizations, considering we are still in the pandemic, and like you said, climate change, climate crisis never went away. So the crafting of a recovery plan should be in place before anything else as part of moving forward. For the city of Mandaue, as mentioned before, we have the performance governance system as our balanced scorecard. When we were crafting our CCAF, it was guided by our existing vision for the city. But as we finished our CCAF, we also realized our CCAF influenced the crafting of our new vision for the city. The new vision for the city from the OSM is Mandaue City, a resilient city driven by manufacturing-based retail and services SMEs. So that, in a nutshell, our recovery plan is embedded in the vision or in the performance governance system roadmap for the city for this year until 2027. So that's it. A recovery plan is very important so that we can move forward.
Thank you. Theo, Sir Recti, how do we take this forward?
Well, yeah. I think what I'm looking at is continuing the work on climate action. Perhaps if we can actually lessen the transmission in our area, and then perhaps relax some restrictions on travel, then we can actually do or continue and sustain the work that have been stalled right now, and the LGU is very much willing to help our partners in their in these challenges that are coming up. But more importantly is that perhaps we hope that the vaccine will arrive soon. The right vaccine will arrive soon, and that everyone will be inoculated, and then there would be less stress in our travels from one point to another. Yeah, and then less stress in interacting with our partners and with our families and with our friends, and everyone would be, but not of course not discounting the new normal that we have to live to live with. No, this new normal is already here. That's why COVID-19 is already like climate change and COVID-19. This is the two new normals, as the title of our webinar suggests.
Thank you, Sir Recti. Sir Engineer Lopez, kayo po. Next steps.
Yeah, our next steps, I think, is to go to our projects. We have a proposal now for the funding agencies to implement again next to the study of a watershed characterization. So we will implement, hopefully we have a project now this year to do the implementation of 3R reforestation and also to have livelihood opportunities to the people to these projects para makabawi rin naman ang mga tao. So ingat sa COVID, strict implementation of protocols para makagawa pa rin ang mga dapat nating magawa dito sa ating local areas. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Architect Marlo, meron kang gustong idagdag?
Siguro we need to, for us to move forward, we need to implement the plan, monitor, and then adjust. So that's the reason so that the plan or the programs will be responsive to what is the need within the community.
Yeah, well, thank you. I was also reflecting on that question. How do we move forward? And I'm reminded, for the last 10 months at least, we've been on a lockdown. And maybe we also need to shift the framework a bit, because I think the lockdown is, how do we prevent the infection? But we know that, there are ways on how to prevent the infection, even if we move forward. And maybe moving forward towards, with our work on climate resilience is actually something that will help us prevent the infection. If people can find food, if they don't have to travel very far, if they can travel, if they don't feel so desperate in meeting their basic needs, maybe they'll be able to take care not only of themselves but also the health of their families and communities. So it's something that I would like. I've been thinking about and exploring is Memorandum Number 5 of the National Task Force, which actually recognizes the role of nonprofits, nonprofit organizations who can help in infection prevention and control in communities. So that's something I think that would be interesting to study, and how it can help us move forward, even if with protocols and checkpoints and lockdowns, but with a new mindset, like how do we move forward with our lives? How do we continue with climate resilience work? How do we recover our economies? And still, yung sabi ni Sir, ingat, no? How do we take care of ourselves? Okay, so before we call on our Red, who will give the closing remarks, I just want to note that we have a question from Alice. If we declare a national climate emergency, would that also mean that the People's Survival Fund will be more easily accessible? I will not try to answer that now. But it's an interesting discussion. However, the PSF has its own mechanism. I think so this is something that we need to discuss. But as we have said earlier, even if there's no declared national climate emergency, the PSF can be accessed by LGUs with the right proposals. So
And
I suppose that's a non-answer to your question. But
just to add, Francis,
yeah, Sela.
I've just been told by our organizers that, in fact, for those who are interested to know more about the dynamics of climate finance in the country, that's something that we can look forward to in episode 3 of this webinar series. No? So climate finance and climate policy on the national and even international level will be touched on March 26th. So definitely, perhaps we will put that on hold for now, no, and invite you to join us again in the coming months so that we can continue that discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Sela. Okay, Sela, over to you for the next part of our program. On my part, I'd like to thank our speakers. Thank you very much for not only for your time, but your work on climate resilience and confronting the pandemic at the same time. So, Sela?
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Francis. That was a very good open forum, and it was very nice to hear all those thoughts on moving forward. No? But as our discussion today comes to a close, I would like to invite ICSC's Executive Director, Red Constantino, to deliver the closing remarks before we close. So, Red, the floor is yours.
Maraming salamat, Sela, and thank you, Francis. It's good to see a lot of friends here, new faces, but also a lot of ones that we've engaged with in the past. So, of course, hello, no? Recti, Ed Mangawang, Peter is here, and also Miss Araceli, Marlo, everyone. Thanks for finding time to contribute to this very important discussion. Let me first express my gratitude, of course, to the Netherlands, the host of the Climate Adaptation Summit 2021, and its embassy in the Philippines. They are our partner for this 3-part webinar series, Climate Change and COVID-19, Adapting to 2 New Normals. To Peter Terpstra, the Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy, who graciously opened the webinar, thank you. This webinar series is a modest contribution of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities to this year's summit, which focuses on the acceleration, innovation, and scaling up of adaptation efforts in response to the climate crisis. I also want to extend my appreciation to all civil servants from national agencies who we work with closely, and just as closely good people from the House of Representatives, in particular the Committee on Climate Change. Also our valued colleagues from local governments, the academia, and civil society partners. This is a very important discussion, and it's taking place even as different sectors are sorting out difficult challenges to our country's ultimate delivery of what we in ICSC, and also I hope all of you, hope is a Philippine NDC, or nationally determined contribution, that fully reflects the sense of ambition and climate justice that we all share. Finance and adaptation strategies are completely married to mitigation strategies because everything is closely interlinked based on the challenges that we face. For instance, when countries fail to deliver ambitious NDCs, especially rich nations, it only serves to elevate the urgency of adaptation, including in particular the loss and damage agenda. Kasal-kasal po ang lahat. I know I'm not alone when I say that we all like stories. Not the story where we already know that the hero will come out victorious in the end, even before the action starts. The story with plot twists is what we favor. Plot twists and turns that help us appreciate not just the ending, but the odds that the protagonist will come out of it, all the challenges, bruised, but hopefully wiser. Perhaps chastened, but not necessarily cynical. The story of our lives now, where we are all protagonists, could not have been better written. Imagine the colossal size of the climate crisis, and imagine the Herculean effort to develop effective long-term development strategies. And as we are grappling with this massive beast of a problem, Another emerges on the horizon in the form of a global contagion. This is our plot twist, and how we are able to grapple with our generation's Godzilla and King Kong will actually define how we move forward. The pandemic is serving as a litmus test to institutions and sectors and their ability to generate outside-the-box ideas and approaches in response to the impacts of a novel and deadly virus. The world seemed to stand still, if you remember, many months ago. We saw deserted roads, empty terminals and airports, border checkpoints everywhere, public transport coming to a halt, and closed establishments reflecting an utterly paralyzed commerce. And yet infections continued to rise. But data also demonstrated the social and commercial pause taken by many countries to slow down the pandemic did little to slow down, much less stop climate change. Here is a particular insight we would do well to weigh seriously. Scientific experts have repeatedly counseled policymakers that the availability of vaccines is not a silver bullet, and that it is one of many items in a suite of responses we need to deploy together if we are to slay this menacing beast, which includes basic common sense tools such as maintaining physical distance, good hygiene, and wearing the right masks. The same is true of the climate crisis. We need systemic, coordinated, and science-based interventions, including common sense steps, such as embracing clean energy, working with scientists at the local level, and promoting corruption-free, people-centered infrastructure, because we are less resilient when we live with conditions made suboptimal because substandard materials and processes were used, just because a few people were busy stealing public funds. From the discussion this morning, there are lessons we should take away that can help align recovery efforts to address both crises, pursuing recovery through climate action, starting with work by local governments and communities. One of the more important insights that will require spirited, sustained attention over the next few years, which I hope colleagues in government, in particular good friends in the Netherlands Embassy, can take interest in. The fact that the pandemic has revealed serious systemic weaknesses that would have taken otherwise decades to reveal. One of these insights, perhaps the biggest of all, and likely globally relevant, is the utter urgency of establishing resilience firmly at the center of macroeconomic fundamentals. Our institutions are simply ill-prepared to take on non-financial external shocks, and the pandemic context shows clear links to how we can do better on climate. The corollary to this is just as easy to explain. The absence of resilience from macroeconomic fundamentals is probably the main reason why we're all in such a big mess. Incidentally, a good example of approaches undertaken with foresight can actually be gleaned from the work of colleagues in NEDA's Region 8 team, which officials from NEDA headquarters would do well to follow more closely. Colleagues, it's about time science guides institutions in the application of mechanisms and the deployment of resources to address vulnerabilities to the impacts of climate change and infectious diseases. Science must lead in shaping the national and local policy and planning agenda for the long haul. The integration of science in our development and policy planning agenda can only help us face better what is already known and what is yet to be fully understood. It doesn't mean we leave it to experts to solve the problems we've identified. We need to use everything we have, integrating capacities of different sectors and disciplines methodically, while promoting the high value of public participation and public ownership. Why is this so? Bakit? Governance and cooperation cannot be pursued in a siloed approach. It is and must be inclusive participation and decision-making that will solve complex and cross-cutting issues. Limiting responses only to climate change or dealing with the pandemic is just as terrible approach too, considering how closely meshed development challenges and solutions are on the ground. Local governments can and must set high standards in promoting collaboration among agencies, experts, academic institutions, and civil society. A final lesson. We need to see the gigantic beastly problems we're grappling with for what they truly are. Opportunities to learn and refine our strategies. Pandemic recovery must align with climate adaptation strategies with common targets and clear collective responsibilities beyond geographic and political boundaries. A year ago, as countries began closing borders, the likelihood of a vaccine, much less a post-pandemic setting, seemed years away. The plot twist, yet again, is that this year, we've seen vaccination commence in several countries already, made possible because the problem was approached with a level of tenacity and urgency that should inform the way we grapple with climate change. As governments ramp up preventive action against the virus, the question of equitable access to resources for all countries is also demonstrating the fundamental inequities the climate community has been dealing with as a reflection of economic systems that thrive on and which seem to be built on inequality. It's time that we push even harder for a climate resilient recovery, which includes certainly the transition to low carbon development. How we establish resilience in Philippine macroeconomic fundamentals is a challenge we together must take on with great urgency. Colleagues, this event is only the first of a three-part series, and we've only scratched the surface. It's important to share more stories and to amplify local voices as we promote together the value of shared leadership. This is thus an invitation to all of you, again, to be part of the discussions for our second and third webinars on February and March 26th, respectively, in order to build momentum together for COP26 in Glasgow. February 26 and March 26. Mark the date. Huwag niyo pong kalilimutan. Maraming salamat. Kita-kits. Stay safe. Mabuhay po kayong lahat.
All right. Maraming salamat, Sir Red. Well put, and I couldn't have summarized it any better myself. Thank you to everybody who's joined us this morning to hear the stories of our friends from Coron, Mandaue, and D1. And as Sir Red said, now this is truly just the beginning of a very important and very fruitful conversation. For our next webinar, we will be shifting the discussion from local communities and their experiences towards science and the emerging areas of research for climate policy and development, where we will be featuring experts from various fields, from climate science, health, economics, and development. So we hope that everyone who is here with us today will stay tuned, will keep the dates marked on their calendars, and join us again on February 26th and March 26th. For more updates, please keep your eyes on the ICSC Facebook page, which is facebook.com/icsc.ngo, or the Netherlands Embassy in the Philippines Facebook page, facebook.com/NL in Philippines, or twitter.com/NL in the Philippines. You may also visit bit.ly/cast21 climate COVID-19 to learn more about the webinar. And for more information on the Climate Adaptation Summit 2021, visit www.cast2021.com. Again, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to having you with us again in the next discussions in the next webinar.